Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. As always, a quick reminder, support the transmission. Your help is crucial to keep me going, and the best way to do that is by becoming a paid subscriber on the Geopolitics and Empire Substack, a little over $9 a month. Every week or two, we hold group Zoom calls with supporters to shoot the breeze on current events. I provide a weekly commentary. As well, you can donate, you can purchase consult if you want to chat with me about expatriation, geopolitics, or whatever you like, the meaning of life. And do check out all of my affiliates through the websites and leave a podcast review if you haven't already. Returning to the podcast is Emmanuel Daniel. He's an author, advisor, and global thought leader on geopolitics, the future of finance, and their impact on business and society. His first book is The Great Transition, The Personalization of Finance is Here. He was listed as a top 10 global influencer in the Fintech Power50 list for 2021-22. Welcome back to Geopolitics and Empire, Emmanuel.
Boy, really great to be back on your show. So much happening. Let's get right into so many different directions today.
Yeah, so much is happening. And for people who are not aware, we previously chatted on my old TNT radio program, as well as on the podcast. I think it was 2023. So a couple of years have passed. And if I recall correctly, on Geopolitics and Empire, you spoke of how the U.S. was going to sort of push through to lead the charge into a network world. I think you mentioned, I may be putting some words in your mouth, that the U.S. had to reinvent itself in 1971 by closing the gold window, and that you were saying that we were at a critical juncture where the U.S. would sort of pull another trick out of its hat and take the world sort of into a digital economy. And it seems like what you said, that's your thesis still stands, and that's where we're headed. And so, people go to your website, they see that you travel a lot, and so maybe you could tell us, what's most interesting for you right now, what's being discussed by bankers, by fintech, by different countries.
Well, what the Trump administration did by practically legalizing, the business of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in the U.S. Is that they've acted to script to what I said in my book, which is that the U.S. will, globalize cryptocurrency by digitizing the dollar. And there are a few assumptions that economists make when they talk about the U.S. debt, for example, as if it's it's an intractable problem. What I'm saying is that debt is the economy. For the foreseeable future, not just the U.S. but all of the major economies are going to function by issuing more debt into the economy. And so then the question is how they're able to internationalize the debt and make that debt investable by the global investment community, and part of that, is based on how quickly can you get your currency digitized. Many countries started with the Chinese approach, which was to introduce, CBDC, central bank digital currency. And this was a matter of the central banks thinking that they could ace the crypto game by taking it on themselves to issue their own version of crypto and then having control over it. And in the U.S., if you look at the previous administration's Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and the others, even the Federal Reserve Bank, they were leaning towards what all the other central banks were thinking. And then Trump comes into the equation, he throws it out the window, and he says, to hell with that, we'll just legalize stablecoins and crypto. And by doing that, given the fact that more than 80% of stablecoins issued in dollars, the dollar is already won. And it's already been internationalized in the digital currencies marketplace. So the path is now open for the U.S. to dominate this next phase of the global economy, which is debt is the economy. The ability to issue debt credibly is the equation by which economies will grow. In fact, in my next book that I'm working on right now, it's tentatively called The Financialization of Everything. It's a theme that I pulled out of my first book. And so here I'm drilling down and going down the rabbit hole in terms of trying to figure out what does financialization of everything means? And here, we right now live in an economy where the economists still value the production economy, the manufacturing economy, the ability to produce. But in a financialized economy, it's the economies that are able to create more leverage, financialize data, and externalize it by, making it an investable asset. Those are the economies that will dominate the global GDP. And even on this front, the US is actually set in a very good place, except that there's a lot of self-doubt, rethinking the process, thinking that the US should do what China is doing, which is to be a production economy. And the irony of it is that the production economy leads to a dead end, because if production gets cheaper and highly commoditized, all the economies that are in production will be struggling to create value out of their production capacity. And that's actually what China is struggling with. Although it looks like a giant in terms of being the world's largest manufacturer of electric vehicles, for example, solar cells and all of that. All of these all of these assets are going to be highly commoditized. And soon, any economy will be able to produce them. In fact, the Chinese players themselves find that they have to go out and set up factories in Europe, in Indonesia, in Mexico, to be able to globalize their production capacity. So then, it sort of creates a complexity in the Chinese economy. So, the name of the game is changing. And the winners and losers are not necessarily, what you see right now.
And just to go back for a second, when it comes to Bitcoin, there's talk of Bitcoin strategic reserve in the US, in other countries. Some countries are pushing it, some are shooting it down. You mentioned stablecoins. Tether is a big thing for the whole, US Bitcoin treasury deal. What just going forward, what are your thoughts on how that's going to play out? So is it some countries like China will go with central bank digital currencies, and then what I like to call it in the US, it's almost like private bank digital currency, where it's the same idea but run through the private sector? And also, what do you make of sort of like Bitcoin was meant to be an anti-system sort of deal, but now, it's like the system is becoming one with it, where BlackRock, and others it is becoming mainstream. So just sort of your thoughts on that and how this is going to go forward with different countries choosing different options.
Yeah, I collect Bitcoin, but every single day I ask myself this question: at which point will this formula break? Will it break because quantum computing, for example, is able to break the algorithm of Bitcoin? And the research that's going into that demonstrates that the more networked it is, the more secure it is, even from quantum computing. Okay, so that's secure for now, but we don't know where the technology is taking us. As far as Bitcoin as a strategic reserve, even gold as a strategic reserve didn't work for the US. And that's because the US has taken the whole world into a floating rate market, where countries find the value of their currencies relative to the value of the currencies with which they do business in. So that formula is now dominant, is centerpiece, and it's difficult to see how a Bitcoin strategic reserve helps to shore up confidence for a currency, especially the US dollar, which the real battle for the US dollar is to continue dominating the global economy. Every single day that the rest of the world is willing to trade in US dollars, what it means is that they're actually taking that coupon that has a value on it and saying, we trust this debt instrument, the US government will pay us back, and then we'll get on with our lives and use it for our everyday use. And so the question to ask is, to what extent is Bitcoin or the most important two stable coins, USDC and USDT, are dollar dominated or dollar denominated. So, and right now it's heading in exactly that direction, and the US will continue dominating the global economy that way. Now, the thing is that whether the US has Bitcoin in its reserve, is immaterial. And if people forget that the US took out the gold as a reserve a long time ago. Gold doesn't really feature in the US Treasury's reserve pool. So, I don't see how crypto will add anything to that. But other countries may well need to have Bitcoin in their reserve because it's the equivalent of having dollars in your reserve. So almost all other economies have the need to shore up enough dollars to pay their debt. So so therefore it makes sense for many other countries to have Bitcoin as part of their reserves.
What do you make of these? Just real quick, these meme coins that seem to be wreaking havoc. We had the Trump coin, Melania coin, and Javier.
Yeah, I saw that.
Right, and
Yeah.
Javier Milei in Argentina, and there was just
actually you just triggered something in my mind on that. The thing about Bitcoin and crypto is that it's not that they are now part of national reserves and all of that. Is that any one of us can issue our own crypto? You can, I can, any one of us, and Trump can, Melania can, the pastor who did his prayer can. It's like and then you put it out there and you give it a valuation and people trust you and buy into it and validate your validation. Or the value that you put onto it. So and this is a game that is going to become universal. But the global and social discipline around how we trust each other, what value we put out to anyone who puts out a crypto is a social phenomenon that is taking its time to mature. So right now we call it meme coins, but over time, we would routinely put out meme coins to raise funds for paying our bills and stuff like that. And someone will trust us or not, and then trade it, and then it fades away, and then the next meme coin comes out. It's going to be a normal social phenomenon. And the more normal it becomes, the less volatile it will become, and then you would find your neighbor issuing a meme coin in order to buy milk or something like that, and then it disappears after that. So we are working out that process at the moment, and then it has an effect on how capital is raised. There was a time when capital was raised only on the traditional formal stock markets. And today you've got all kinds of different markets where you can raise capital. Then the ICO business came, or the business model came into being. It took a back seat because of the integrity of the process, but it'll come back again. And there will be a different mechanism by which capital is raised. In fact, there's the macro development that's taking place on the global stage, and there's the micro development that's taking place in everybody's daily lives. And these two are coming together, and that's what the meme coin phenomenon is about. These two markets are coming together. Already, you will see that in many markets, it's very difficult to run an IPO, initial public offering. And that's because the retail investors' funds are now being diverted to meme coins, to all kinds of alternative capital. And so the traditional stock market is increasingly finding it difficult to raise capital. Even in the US, where the stock market is going, really gangbusters at the moment, it's only supporting the top 6 internet stocks, and then a few supporting stocks behind that. But if you take the traditional stock market, it's not doing a valuation increase of more than 8%. So in other words, if you are a good old-fashioned manufacturing company in the U.S., today you're hard pressed to to raise capital, to see higher valuations for your business, and to be rewarded for running a good business. So all of that is up in the air at the moment, and there's a convergence taking place with traditional large capital markets, with the end user having more power in his hand to influence the capital raising formula. And that actually is the best way to think about and imagine where memecoins is taking us.
And I don't recall if we spoke about this last time, but any thoughts on, I think you mentioned previously commodification, but this idea of tokenization, which I think many countries are going to be pushing in. Any thoughts on that?
Tokenization of?
I guess assets. I've heard BlackRock and others talk about tokenizing.
You're talking about digital assets. Yeah. Right. So digital assets is still early days. I'm spending a lot of time talking to players who are setting up digital asset banks, digital asset exchanges, and digital asset custodian services. And some of them are banks themselves, the traditional banks, thinking that the future is in digital assets. And this is where something that I'll be writing about in my book, The Financialization of Everything. The whole idea is that if you can digitize your asset, and tie it to a real world asset that is digitized by creating a blockchain entry, and then make that tradable. It's happening with different degrees of success. And the question I ask my friends who are setting up these digitized digital asset banks and exchanges and custodian services, are you really going to make money? Is this a real revenue generating business model? And when I look at the assets that they put up on their exchanges and on their platforms, a lot of it is financialized assets, things like securities being issued and then digitized and made tradable on those platforms. But being tradable is not a given. Every tradable market has to be incentivized, has to be kickstarted to become a reality, and that's not easy. And in fact, I'm seeing a lot of failures in terms of the ability to create markets. So the fact that an asset can be digitized and put on a platform, that's the easy part. Creating a market around it is not a given. And I'm still learning what are the critical success factors that need to be in place for a market to be created. So it's a game of hurry up and wait. All the banks that are trying to get into this business saying that that's where the future is. I think it will be a qualified success in the same way that we saw, the non-fungible tokens, NFTs, were a qualified success. In fact, NFTs have become so shrunken that people wonder whether it will take a life of its own again. But I think what it does is that it serves a purpose that's very specific, and then nothing more. Like if you needed to issue an NFT to get your asset out there, you put it up on one of the NFT platforms, but for no other reason. You're not going to be rich out of it, and it's not going to be a meme stock in that way. So lots of things are happening on the macro front and on the individual front, and they're coming together. And it's actually a reflection of what the digitized world is going to be like, what the networked world is going to be like. So some things are a given. Anything that's information, anything that can be turned into data will be an asset. And then creating a market out of that asset has to be done with a few critical success factors in place. We don't know what they are. It might well be that markets will work best in a highly localized community rather than in a global setting, because the people in your community understand or rather value some assets more than others. And a few things will become global as well. So the whole world is in a learning curve here, and I'm following papers issued by stock exchanges on going into alternative assets, and banks, promoting themselves as real world asset custodians, all of that. So we haven't seen the winning formula, and maybe something has to happen to turn real world assets, into a real asset in the digitized space.
And I was going to bring up NFTs, and you did that for me. And something you mentioned before I hit record, and I've seen you. I think you put on your YouTube, you published a video where you were at I think in China at the DeepSeek headquarters, and so LLMs, language learning models, AI, OpenAI. China's DeepSeek. It's all the rage. I haven't really covered the topic, so it's a bit beyond me. And so, if you could sort of tell us about what's going on in that space, and what relevance it has geopolitically, geoeconomically, and so forth.
Yeah, this thing about tying AI to geopolitics alerts us to the need to upgrade our understanding of what geopolitics actually means. Now, the way in which AI is being described in geopolitical terms, it's either you or me. Either the US or China will dominate. But we actually live in a very different world from the 1800s, where the Industrial Revolution was originated in the UK, but perfected in Germany, perfected in Japan, and these economies became incredibly highly industrialized. They are the ones they were, manufacturing the huge Navy ships, the torpedo submarines, and all of that. And they were progressing much faster than the UK. And then you ask yourself, so therefore, is the UK a loser in the Industrial Revolution? A lot of original ideas still continue to come out of the UK because of the scientific community and the way in which they were organized around the Royal Society, and respected the integrity of the discovery process and all of that. So, the same phenomenon is being repeated today in the way that a lot of LLM and AI breakthroughs are taking place in the US. And the big breakthrough that we're all working towards, which is AGI, which is artificial general intelligence. And a lot more work is being done in the US than any other parts of the world. Part of the reason is that the availability of capital and the availability of talent. And then you would get a renegade province like China trying to ace the game that is originated in the home country. And the thing is that it is a given that the subsidiary countries, the countries that benefit from the original research that is generated, will do better than the original country, because the original country is embroiled in a whole range of self-doubt and historical baggage. And when China gets into AI, it doesn't need to worry about the ethics question, the processes that and the political conflicts that take place in the US. It just needs to concentrate on the output, and in that way, it's not just China. It's any number of the other countries around the world. Even France today, is trying to make headways on the AI front. And this is just a repeat of what happened in the industrial age, and the process by which the industrial age became globalized. But the big difference is that AGI and AI enables the dumbest countries in the world to operate as if they are smart. Okay, so imagine a very small country developing its own large language models, is able to harness the all of the content and the learnings that exist in that country, and use that in a logical way and all that. So it makes the dumbest countries look smart eventually. So in that context, when we think about geopolitics, we are actually thinking about the rise of all countries around the world, not just China and the US. What in China is that, and I want to say a bit of what's been happening to China in the last 18 months. And that is that China moved out and consciously, stepped out of the U.S. Structured global financial architecture, and started its own journey of developing its own capital building capabilities. And a lot of its capital building capabilities today is state sponsored, as opposed to global capital market sponsored in the past. So when Alibaba, for example, became a global phenomenon in 2004 or so, that was because Masayoshi Son and and the U.S. Capital market players like Goldman Sachs came to China, funded these companies, and then put them up on the U.S. stock market, to raise capital. So the capital actually came from outside of China. And the state has decided in the last 2 years or so that it doesn't want to be funded externally, that it wants to be funded domestically. And when I looked at that, I said, will they be able to match the funding that is available in the US capital market? And I also looked at historical examples, Germany, the Austro-Hungarian Empire in its time, and then Japan. And I discovered that actually many countries are able to fund industrial development and breakthrough technologies on their own, even if they didn't have the same access to global capital markets. So we shouldn't underestimate China's ability to fund its own breakthroughs in technology. And there's enough wealth here that players like DeepSeek, for example, DeepSeek started as a hedge fund, and the founders figured out that hedge funds is not the only business they should be in, because the state is, proscribing them very dramatically. So they needed to find other outlets. So he invested in technology, and invested in his quants, looking at algorithms and the breakthroughs that were needed in AI. But the point there is that he even had the funding available to do that. Yes, he didn't have the massive fundings that OpenAI has, but he was wealthy enough to do that. So when I look at hedge funds in other countries, I don't see them having that kind of funding to invest in technology-driven alternatives to their business models and all of that. So for now, the wealth in China is enough to invest in breakthrough technologies. But as we go along, you'll find that the biggest challenge that China has, and this is an irony, is also the biggest strength it has at the moment. I've watched how China is a beneficiary of an excellent education system that started in the 1970s and has educated almost its entire population to be literate. It's one of the most literate countries in the world. The U.S. has been dropping, and high degree of STEM, education in this economy. And so the talent pool is massive. Then when you think about the fact that the U.S. talent pool has been dropping, the attractiveness of the U.S. is that it's got the access to the talent pool of 7.5 billion people around the world. Anybody who wants to be a talent in AI can see themselves going to the U.S., participating in the U.S. economy, and contributing and finding themselves, being recognized. Whereas what China is trying to do is that it's trying to promote the idea that the Han Chinese is the alternative, and so they're limiting themselves. So the thing that I look for in China is that at some point it also needs to democratize its learning models and make it attractive for outsiders to come out and participate in China. And only then will we be talking about a level playing field. So there's capital and there's talent that we need to see how these two evolve in these two economies. And the big thing about LLMs and geopolitics is that geopolitics is no longer a zero-sum game. It's not an either-or. It's actually a democratization game where all of the benefits being created either in China or the US are being internationalized. And when the development of AI moves from its machine phase, which is the integration between the algorithms and the hardware at the moment, which is where China has been doing well, and then move into the application phase, we will start to see huge breakthroughs taking place anywhere in the world. If you're talking about rearing kangaroos, it probably will take place in Australia. If you're talking about how do you run an LLM for a safari, that's probably going to take place in Africa. Things like that.
So we're talking about digital currencies. So there's that trend, CBDCs, AI. What will if we extrapolate, what will the world look like? We've got the wrecking crew, the wrecking ball of Musk and DOGE, right? I just read today they're talking about creating an EU DOGE, and so just further thoughts on what life will be like in the coming years when it comes to this sort of space.
Yeah. So what's happening on the U.S. Current administration's front? I'm keeping my judgment reserved for the moment because there is the rhetoric of what Trump puts out, which is totally unconsumable. It's evil, and yet the substance of what he does seems to be out of the box, seems to be potentially promising. And it's all about how he plays the game. And in order to find our moral compass to see what will work and what will not work, we go back to the things that our parents have been teaching us, which is that a man is what he says he is, and that anyone who can articulate what he wants to achieve probably carries the moral of that in himself. And here you've got someone who articulates something very different from what he's actually doing. So on that front, to be honest, we are in uncharted territory. The only thing I would say about DOGE and then externalizing it and using DOGE as a wrecking ball to destroy a lot of other relationships and so on is that Elon Musk is self-serving, and he has so far touched on inefficiencies in the U.S. Government architecture that are so small and so inconsequential, and leaving out the most consequential parts of U.S. government spending for himself. So I'm just waiting for the moment when he will start saying that, NASA has to spend more money, funding private enterprise. There is no alternative to spending the money that they need to, stuff like that. Or the CIA needs to spend money in certain ways to get the outcomes that the U.S. wants for itself. So he is already by nature a self-serving person. Elon Musk is that way. Peter Thiel is that way. So we're dealing with a highly politicized cohort of wealthy people who seem to have a handle on the state. So we'll have to see how that evolves. But what's been done so far, it is working up to a self-serving narrative. That's how I see what's happening at the moment.
I wouldn't disagree with you. I'm a conservative, but there are people who listen who are, MAGA conservatives, and they sort of get blinded and don't pay attention to what you just outlined, this sort of techno oligarchy and the dangers there. I'm curious. I also read today it was reported that Visa and MasterCard payment systems may soon return to Russia, according to the Russian state Duma. So again, geopolitically, any thoughts on where we are between East and West? We've had the war and the sanctions where the West tried to cut off Russia, and now they might be bringing them back. They might have discussions now with Trump and Putin regarding Ukraine, and so there's the whole SWIFT and BRICS. And just any thoughts on that space? Are we going to live in a bifurcated world where different regions have different systems? Or will they sort of come together and become maybe have interoperable systems?
Actually, pointing out payment systems is very interesting because payment systems is an architecture that has defied geopolitics, and as an indication of how the world will eventually turn out. And that is that first thing, payment systems has failed to isolate Russia. Despite the lack of access to the dollar. Russia made its bilateral deals with a number of different countries, and it still has access to the dollar through other forms. Secondly, today, the amount of technology that's gone into payment systems makes it ubiquitous. It's border-free, and any number of fintechs, not just in the U.S. but around the world, that could feed any political system. So it's become politically free in that way, and it's even instant. And the most instant of payment systems is the stablecoin, the US dollar stablecoin, and Russia might well be a big user of the US dollar stablecoin. So here you have official policy that restricts Russia, and yet it has access to the digitized version of the dollar. So I think because of all of these factors, it's a no-brainer that the traditional platform players like Visa and MasterCard. Visa and MasterCard are not dollar players, although a huge chunk of their payment processing is done in dollars. They are agnostic about the currency. It's actually a technology. So, it's not inconceivable that they can go back into Russia and create, pairs, currency pairs that could trade with each other and have their systems solved. In fact, at the back end, Visa and MasterCard do not even run their own processing. They can actually outsource that to companies in the Russian region or third-party players who can do the processing for them and still have their cards accepted. So we are seeing how technology has stumped geopolitical intentions in that way. We're becoming an increasingly more networked global economy, and there's no, pulling back from that. The thing for leading countries to do is to figure out how to digitize their currencies. China, for example, was thinking that by digitizing the renminbi and having it issued by the central bank, will enable it to be internationalized, and then they still have control. But that's not working out because the U.S. has put out the sentiment out there that anything that's controlled by the state is not a good thing. By actually rejecting that proposition in the U.S. So around the world, you'll find people who are needing to do payments, they would trust payments which are truly global and not dominated by any state. So these are the norms that are developing because of payment systems that has to be worked into the geopolitics of the world, and that is that countries do not have the controls that they thought they had in the past.
I heard you a couple of months back again on your website. You post a lot of your material. I think you gave an interview to another podcast mentioning the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS.
Yes.
And there's always an air of mystery surrounding them. But is there anything interesting, regarding the BIS and what we're discussing?
I'm glad that you asked. In fact, I'm just waiting for the day when Trump is going to work on them. Okay, just waiting for the I think he's been working on all the other global agencies, the WTO, the WHO, he's just going down the list. And at one point, he's going to hit the Bank for International Settlements. The U.S. politicians, don't have anything good to say about the Bank for International Settlements. The U.S. Administrators, the Federal Reserve Bank and the Treasury, have a very cozy relationship with the Bank for International Settlements. And in fact, when I watched that relationship, I'm just intrigued how accepting, like Janet Yellen and even Jeremy Powell was to the idea of a CBDC for the US. And anyone who knows the US well enough will know that the pushback against the state issuing a currency where they can control usage is a non-starter in the US. And yet, the Federal Reserve Bank people thought that it would work until Congress, went all the way and banned the idea. So now it's a dead idea in the US. The big thing of the Bank for International Settlements in geopolitical terms is that it's a friend of different political systems. It works with all of them, including the members of BRICS, for example, which includes Russia, which is a restricted country, in the BIS scheme. In fact, the recently concluded BRICS meeting in Kazan, there was a lot of talk of having a alternative payment systems. And even I was confused about where the talk was coming from. And they promoted the idea of something called M-Bridge, which was a variation on a project that was originated in Hong Kong called M-Bridge, which is a blockchain-based global cross-border payment system. And the members of BRICS were saying we could repurpose M-Bridge for the BRICS version of M-Bridge. And the BIS came out very quickly and said, oh, no, we cannot support any payment system that involves Russia, because Russia is a sanctioned state. And the general manager of the BIS came out very quickly to say, we do not work with sanctioned states. However, BRICS has one sanctioned state, but a number of other states which are not sanctioned by BIS. So what gives? Something has to give. And then a few days later, the general manager Carsten, he just took his hands off M-Bridge completely and said that the BIS is not going to support M-Bridge anymore, which within the BIS community was a shocker, because it's like, this is essentially a BIS project. How can you not support one and you support all of the others? And so the BIS is going through that wound at the moment. It's nursing that wound within its system, where the general manager has had to pull out from geopolitically tainted projects, which will offend the U.S. So now I'm waiting for Trump to use that as an excuse to question the validity, the integrity of the BIS as a global payment architecture. And we are now moving into a world where the global payment and banking architecture is going to start to disintegrate, and we will find multiple different models operating around the world. Even in China, I'm finding that senior Chinese bankers and regulators are being prevented from attending BIS meetings, being told that they cannot attend all the meetings that they want to, and so on. Because in China, the regulators are very professional, they are very global, and they see a need to participate in the global structure. But the politicians have other alternative ideas in their mind, and they're working through that. So I see a world where both the US and China will be pulling back on their support for the Bank for International Settlements as a vehicle that creates a global payments and banking architecture. So, like today, the fact that when you take any bank in the world and say and look at their balance sheet and say that how much capital you're carrying, what is your liquidity position, and so on. These are rules that have been created by the BIS that enables us to assess any bank in the world on the same premise. So if you take the BIS out, every country will have its own little model. Even in the US right now, there are two different models, one for the global banks that subscribe to the BIS model, and another for the local banks that are given exemptions on capital charges and so on, because otherwise they can't function. The cost of capital is too high, as based on the BIS model. So if Trump comes in now and starts to ridicule and make the BIS benign, then we will need to start thinking about how the globalized financial system will operate in the future.
Any thoughts on the old world, the analog world, gold? There's a lot of, just the past couple of days, a lot of ruckus around gold now. What's happening in London? There's a scramble for gold. What role do you see for gold?
I'm a baby boomer, and I should respect gold, but all of the criticisms that I see being thrown at Bitcoin can also be thrown at gold. And I think that like for example, gold is claimed to be a finite commodity. It is not finite. You can still mine gold, if you can afford it, and there are asteroids out there which are entirely made of gold. Which, if you mine from there, you have an infinite pool. And yet, gold carries a certain value in the global marketplace. So both gold and Bitcoin play a function in absorbing valuations and the excess capacity and the excess liquidity that exists in the global marketplace. And it's a store of value in that way. And I think that Ray Dalio was the most accurate in describing the continued use of gold despite the rise of Bitcoin. For a number of factors. There are those who still want to remain traditional, and there's nothing like a physical asset that you can touch and hold and store, as opposed to a digital asset. And there are some risks with cryptocurrencies that we are not yet familiar with, and so we don't know how that will evolve. So for the moment, gold is still a asset of last resort. When you have to sell everything else, you would retract back into gold and how much of gold assets that you still own. And the large countries like China and India still keep gold as part of their overall reserves, although the U.S. doesn't. People don't realize that. So gold plays a function that I totally do not understand or appreciate, and it's just a function of what society values, and I'll just leave it at that, because I follow how gold moves relative to inflation, but it's actually stopped following inflation today. It's being driven by other factors, and one of the factors is that there's way too much liquidity in the global marketplace, and it requires a variety of assets to be able to absorb them, and that can be said about any number of alternative assets that exist today.
And thoughts on the role of cash? I've read reports, different governments, different institutions specifically say they want to greatly decrease the use of cash or eliminate it altogether. Here in Mexico, the banks have time and time again keep trying to get us to activate our phone payments and to stop using cash. Just any thoughts on the role of cash in this future that we've been discussing, physical cash?
The move towards reducing cash started in the 1990s, And at that time, it was more for productivity reasons because it involves people, it involves transportation. There are a lot of cost elements that are associated with cash. Security is another one. And then today, the declining role of cash is being driven by how digitized we are in our everyday life. And the more digitized you are, and the more time you spend on a digital platform, you would need a digital currency to make your payments and to function in that digital economy. There are kids today that spend maybe 60% of their waking hours gaming, right? And in that world, cash is irrelevant. In fact, tokens are more important than even money. So they're already trading tokens. And so, to the extent to which the things that we do in our everyday life, we call for a cab using a Uber app, and that's how we run our everyday life. Then digital is there's no alternative to digital. So the motivations for moving out of cash today is because of the digital economy, digital lifestyle, and the fact that all of us networked with each other in a digital platform. So the decline in the use of cash is inevitable. However, some countries, including Switzerland, by the way, have mandated rules to continue to preserve the use of cash by saying that nobody's allowed to reject a cash payment, if it is made. So this is for the residual community that still needs to exist and who's not yet, or who will reject being digitized in their lifestyle. And it's possible to have that. In the same way that a horse-drawn carriage still exists in many parts of the world, even if you only see one horse-drawn carriage in heavy traffic, that alternative is still available. So the Mexican government, mandating the use of digital platforms and digital money also accelerates all the convenience points that needs to be digitized. So if you take vending machines, for example, you can't have ordinary people having their lives digitized, and then you're jogging in a park and you see a vending machine and you don't have cash, and then what do you do about that? So what governments do is that to mandate that any acceptance device has to have a digital platform by which to make that payment. So in some countries, all vending machines must be digitized. In other words, you can only pay by a credit card or a phone app, or both cash and a phone app. So is this transition that is being managed? I think that is always a small community of activists who try to argue for one way or another. A small degree of activists who insist that cash should still be a acceptable and valid mode of payment. And when they do that, you think that it's a political thing. But actually, it's a lifestyle thing. It's a war that's already been decided. It's just that how society plays that through. And sometimes when we look at the narratives being created, we just have to decide that it's inconsequential and then just keep moving on.
Funny you mentioned horse-drawn carriage in the town where I live here in Mexico. I lived here over a decade. In the downtown, they still have the horse-drawn carriages, and it's the first. Last week, we took a ride in a horse-drawn carriage. The first time in the decade that I've been living here. Finally, we got around to it, so that was amusing. I'm just curious. I had a guest on recently talking about networked states or cyber states. Balaji. He's creating this network state in Malaysia. I'm just curious if you're familiar with that and if you have any comments.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, Balaji is actually spending more time in Southeast Asia than he is in the US. I heard that he's a lot in Singapore, which is where I'm from, and he's probably working with the Malaysian government on their Madani project, which is to make Malaysia a network state, and that's a political thing. It's the politicians' desire to dominate the digital conversation, and in many countries, it's not the large companies. So when you go into the U.S., it's the top six IT companies that are driving all the digitization, the network effect, the payment system, all of that. And then you go to a country like Malaysia, where if the state doesn't push it, there is nobody big enough or consequential enough or has the capital to build a digital economy in that regard. And then when you come to China, it's actually a combination of the state and large enterprises, and the fact that the large enterprises are sponsored by the state. So that's the way in which this whole network effect is being engendered and husband around the world. And I think what Balaji is trying to point out is that the role of the state is just as important as the role of the large businesses that are creating the network effect.
And
I'm a little dry. Sorry. Balaji had a lot of good points in his original thesis, but I think what he's doing right now is going around the world looking for governments that will support his idea of a network state. The more the government is involved, actually it kills private enterprise. So it's a question of who is capable of funding the network society that is coming into being, and the role of government is very important for small countries because, for example, in Malaysia and Singapore, just giving national identities enables the network economy to go even further. So by giving national identities means that your credit cards, your driver's license, your state-sponsored documentation like birth certificates and all that is digitized, and then the payment players can come on board, and the banks can come on board and provide digital banking entirely seamless because your identity is secured, and that's what India did. Which is very different from what China did. In China, the state wasn't ready in 2010 when Alipay and WeChat Pay came into being. So China is a country, very interestingly, being run by private enterprise platforms, and the state depends on the private enterprise. But because India was later in the process of building a payment infrastructure, the state took on the role of digitizing the identity of all of its citizens, so that any payment player can come on and use that identity to complete a transaction. So you have two different models operating in the two largest countries in the world, and the extent to which the state becomes competent, and the rise of the competent state is a big theme that I am thinking a lot about, and it's a theme that actually started during COVID. I went to countries as destitute as Burundi, and it was functioning as a sustainable economy just because the Ministry of Health figured out how to put out an app out there for people to register their COVID status, and then to check on every visitor coming in through the airport, and give them a tag and all of that. And because many states around the world were able to handle the COVID pandemic, in a meaningful way, they now have the confidence that they can extend that capability into the network economy and create the network infrastructure for their respective countries. So when you go into countries like Malaysia, Singapore, Burundi in Africa, you actually see the state telling the private enterprise, you cannot do anything that we don't allow you to do, because we have the control, and we manage the identity of all the digital identity of all our citizens, and so we decide which among you will be given access to the platforms that we have created. And so that's the state of play in terms of the network economy in the different parts of the world.
And this bridges, I always have to ask this question, because the themes we're covering are touch on utopia, dystopia, and the specter of Orwell's 1984. You've had a number of people, including the Greek, I think, former finance minister Yanis Varoufakis. He's now talking about techno feudalism, and I know often you seem optimistic, but for example, I may have mentioned this last time. Back in 2022, my own government, the Department of Homeland Security, banned me for life from PayPal, and it's there's people, there's a number of us who we're innocent, we're not committing any crimes. They're just thought crimes or malinformation. We might have a guest on or someone who tells an inconvenient truth for whichever government or private interest. And I'm also banned on Patreon. And I just read this morning there was an American podcaster who was going to travel to the UK, and many countries are activating these what are they called? Electronic travel authorizations. The UK just in January this year, you have to now, you can't just buy a ticket and go to the UK like you used to. You have to fill out an online digital sort of social credit form and ask for permission. And his was denied. And the EU is activating later this year the similar, the ETIAS. And so just any thoughts on where if things can go wrong, where these systems can edge a bit towards authoritarian sort of digital control. Just any thoughts there?
That's exactly what I mean by the rise of the competent state. And the state is now able to absorb and harness the technologies that are being created. In a number of countries, Singapore and Dubai, for example, you do not even need to carry your passport anymore. If you've traveled to the country before, they have your facial recognition entirely. That despite any of the documents that you carry, they know who you are. So if you carried another passport, they know who you are. And the amount of data that they collect, even on the passport itself, they're able to tell instantly if that's a fake passport, because it's the system, it's the AI that processes all of this data, and they can collect massive amounts of data. There is no agency that has the right to collect all of the data that is flowing through as the state. And the extent to which the state is able to collect all of the data, including your health data. So when you go through an immigration channel, not only do they know who you are and they verify who you are, they even know your health data, like how healthy you are, and and they have access to temperature and stuff like that. So and the UK, the ETA, is actually trying to monetize that data, which is actually ridiculous, because countries like Singapore and Dubai use that to make travel much more convenient, which is they process thousands of travelers through the airports without a queue, because you just walk past, you're being cleared very, very quickly, and then the UK got its hands on this technology, and then saying that you got to pay $20 or something to to register and all that, and that's nonsense. And the UK will figure it out over time that actually it is better for them not to charge that $20 or £20 or whatever it is, and have more visitors come and spend more money, and stuff like that. Then the question comes as to if the state has all this data, they can actually inadvertently cancel you, right? And that's actually happened to my friend in Dubai, because he's resident there and his son wasn't captured by the system, and they kept denying him. And his son is like 7 years old or something, and they couldn't get him up on the system until they had to go to the office, beg, provide all kinds of documents, and then get him on board. So whether inadvertently or otherwise, the state has a power that it never had before. And that's exactly what I mean by the rise of the competent state. then it depends on the state's self-perception to moderate itself to say what it wants to control and what it cannot control. So the state has to say to itself that any breakthroughs in technology has to be a private enterprise activity. It needs to be funded and supported as a private enterprise. We shouldn't be second guessing where the technology should be taking us. And China is having that problem right now because after DeepSeek went to market, they went to market without the concurrence of the cybersecurity agency, the government department that looks at every algorithm being created before approving it, and they didn't approve the DeepSeek model, and yet the DeepSeek model is superior to everything else that's been created. So here you have the state running after the private enterprise to bring it back into control. So that's the world we live in at the moment, and out of this cauldron will come out a few states that get it right and have a sustainable relationship with private enterprise and breakthrough technologies, and a few states that imagines that it has increased power and then misuses that power for control, for subservience, and all of that. So we are seeing a new narrative being created at the moment.
I mean, Germany, I just saw yesterday, 60 Minutes did a report on Germany in talking to German politicians, and now it's a crime to insult people. And they did a raid on a German citizen's home. They took their phone and computer for just making a joke or an insult online. And so I fear where we're going down that slippery slope. We've covered a lot. Is there any other, theme that you wanted to mention that you thought was important, or final thought for us?
Actually, coming on your program, the big theme that's in my mind is, what do we mean by geopolitics? And geopolitics is not a zero-sum game anymore. And geopolitics is not a one-upmanship ecosystem. It's really becoming an increasingly democratized playing field where a number of different players have all got roles to play in the ecosystem. So for me specifically, when I think about US-China, keeping your focus just on US-China, blinds you from a lot of other things that are taking place on the ground. So when DeepSeek came out, it was characterized as a geopolitical win, but actually it was a technology win between open source and closed box systems. And open source is winning. And because DeepSeek came into being and became validated, all of the other open source players suddenly woke up and figured that they should go further than what OpenAI has done. I mean, although the name is OpenAI, it's actually a closed box approach. And so Llama, had lost its way, and DeepSeek motivates it to move a lot faster than before. So it's not a geopolitical, playing field. It's really a technology playing field that is being advanced regardless of where the technology is coming from. And so on the network front, I think that different countries operate differently in terms of the capacity of the state to be able to dictate the narrative of being more networked as a society. And on that front, the winners and losers are not the same as the World War I and the World War II winners and losers. It's a very different playing field, and we need to look out for the smaller states that will shine in this whole process.
All right. Well, we've covered a lot. Again, your first book is The Great Transition, The Personalization of Finances here, I think published just a couple of years back. And people can follow you on X. All the links are in the description, EmmanuelDaniel.com. And I think your new book, did you say it's going to be published later this year or next year?
Yeah, this year. Yeah, the second half of the year. Yeah.
All right. Well, always
Financialization of everything. Yeah. So.
Is that the working title or the final title?
The working title. I like the title, but I don't know whether my publisher thinks that the phrase is too technical, but I don't know. We'll see. Yeah.
All right. Well, always great getting an update from you. Thank you for coming back on the podcast, Emmanuel.
Thank you very much.